This lesson is on exponential expressions. It's really just a preview of what exponents mean. And so an exponential expression is an expression that has two parts. So the first part is the base, and in my example here, that is the letter B. The base is the number that is going to be multiplied. The n is called the exponent, or sometimes you'll see it called a power. So b to the power of n, or b with the exponent of n. Basically, the n tells us how many times are we going to multiply b times itself. So please don't take b times n, that would be incorrect. The n says use b an n number of times. So for example, if I had 2 to the third, that would be 2 times 2 times 2 3 times. And in a case where you could actually multiply it, you would take 2 times 2 times 2 to get 8. Now, if you're going to evaluate these on your calculator, which I'm certain most of you will do, you need to look for a button that looks like this, the little caret button, so 2 to the third. You might also have a button that looks like this, which is y to the x, or maybe x to the y. But really, if I plug them into my calculator like that, you should be able to get 8 from your calculator. Again, you have to make sure when you're entering them in that you're entering them correctly. So I will show you what I mean on our next examples here. So for this first one, I really want to focus in on the difference between these two examples. On my first example, I have -5 squared, but that -5 is in parentheses. And when I have the parenthesis or the exponent on the outside of the parenthesis, that means this is like -5 times -5. And when I enter that into my calculator, if I'm letting my calculator do the work, then I need to make sure that I enter it in as -5 and then the little caret button or whatever button you are using, and then 2. And that should give me the answer of positive 25, because negative times a negative is a positive and 5 times 5 is 25. If I were to be lazy and say, I don't need those parentheses, and I'm going to put -5 squared, I'm going to end up with -25, because a negative on the inside of parentheses is different than a negative on the outside. So this would be incorrect for this question. Let's look at our second example where I would not put the parenthesis. This is -2 to the fourth. So we talked about absolute value and opposites. This means the opposite of whatever you get when you take 2 to the fourth. So 2 to the fourth, remember, would be 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And then whatever you get, make the answer negative. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is 16, and then my answer would be -16. Now at this point, I feel it's important for me to point out, I do not need for you to write it out this way. I'm writing it out this way so that you understand what's happening step by step. Make sure that you're able to plug it into your calculator to find those answers, and they understand the basic concept here, and you should be fine. For my third example here, I have 1/2 to the fifth. So again, I could write out 1 times 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, etc., or 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. Really what I'm going to do, and we haven't talked about properties of exponents yet, but I'm going to take 1 to the fifth over 2 to the fifth and find my answer. So 1 to the fifth is 1 times 1 times 1, 5 times, which is 1. And then 2 to the fifth is 32. Again, I can use my calculator to evaluate that. I was too lazy to write out 1/2 5 times. Same thing here. I've got -2/3 to the third power, or cubed as we call it in mathematics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take -2 to the third, and I'm going to take 3 to the third. So -2 to the third would be -2 times -2 times -2. That's 3 times, which gives me -8. And 3 to the third is 3 times 3 times 3, or 27, and so my answer will be 27. Notice on this question that negative was still on the inside of the parentheses, so I treated it like I did that first question. Here are a few more for us to try. I've got -3 to the third power, so this would be like -3 times -3 times -3. Again, that negative's on the inside. So that means make sure you plug it into your calculator correctly. You should end up with -27 as your solution there. And then my second question, I've got -4 squared, but remember that negative is not in the parentheses. So I'm going to take 4 squared, which is 16, and then I'm going to put the negative on there so that my answer is -16. So if I plug it into my calculator correctly, I can plug it in just like this. Make sure that you don't put the parentheses around the -4, and you should be fine. For my third question here, I've got -2/3 to the 4th power, but the negative's on the outside, which means I'm going to go ahead and find 2 to the 4th, and I'm going to find 3 to the 4th, and then I'm going to put a negative on my answer. So I'm going to keep my negative. 2 to the 4th is like 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. That's 16. 3 to the 4th is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, which is 81. So I've got 16 and I've got 81. And on my last one, and notice that one was a negative. On my last one, I've got 1 squared and 5 squared, or remember I could have written it as 1/5 times 1/5 2 times. It's up to you which way you want to write it. 1 squared is 1, 5 squared is 25, so my answer is 1/25. I would get the same exact answer here. 1 times 1 is 1, 5 times 5 is 25.